The history of our story began 3 billion years ago. Our planet was nothing more than a swirl of atoms. Fast forward to 6 million years ago, something incredible happens. From these humble beginnings, the first hominids appeared. These were the ancestors of humans. Over the next millions of years, they would evolve, adapt, and spread across the planet. Homo erectus took the daring step to leave Africa and venture into new lands, a species bold enough to explore, to push beyond their borders. Around 4000 BCE, we see the birth of what we now call civilization. But it was around 12,000 years ago that a monumental shift occurred in human history, one that would change the course of civilization forever. Humans discovered how to farm. In the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, near the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, early humans began to settle in one place. They learned to plant seeds, grow crops, and domesticate animals. This shift from hunting and gathering to farming led to the rise of the first cities. The Sumerians in Uruk, around 4000 BCE, were one of the first to develop such a civilization. Agriculture allowed them to grow enough food to support large populations. Cities like Uruk were bustling centers of activity, with farmers, merchants, priests, and rulers. But agriculture also had its drawbacks. As humans settled into fixed communities, their diets changed, and surprisingly, their physical stature decreased over time. Nevertheless, this was the dawn of civilization. One of the most fascinating figures of this early period was King Gilgamesh, the ruler of Uruk. He wasn't just a historical king, he became a legend. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature, tells the story of his quest for immortality. It reflects humanity's eternal struggle with life, death, and the meaning of existence. The Epic of Gilgamesh is more than just a story. It's a window into the mind of early humans. They feared death, sought glory, and pondered the mysteries of the world, much like we do today. But Gilgamesh's story also marks the beginning of written records. The Sumerians were pioneers in writing, using cuneiform scripts etched into clay tablets. Writing allowed them to keep records, communicate over distances, and share knowledge with future generations. While the Sumerians were building the foundations of civilization, they weren't the only ones. To the north, the Akkadians rose under the leadership of Sargon the Great, around 2300 BCE. Sargon conquered Sumer and established one of the world's first empires. His empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, and his legacy of central governance and military conquest would shape the empires that followed. Around the same time, across the mountains and deserts to the east, the Indus Valley civilization was thriving. This ancient civilization, located in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, was one of the most advanced of its time. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were marvels of urban planning, complete with sophisticated sewage systems, standardized weights and measures, and large public baths. Yet, much of the Indus Valley's history remains a mystery. Their written language has not yet been deciphered, leaving us to wonder what their daily lives were truly like. But while the Indus Valley civilization was flourishing, the ancient Egyptians were embarking on a monumental task, one that would become their lasting symbol of greatness. Egypt, situated along the fertile banks of the Nile River, was a civilization obsessed with immortality. To the Egyptians, death wasn't the end. It was merely a transition to the afterlife. And they believed that their pharaohs, the rulers of Egypt, needed to be well prepared for the journey. The most iconic of these preparations, the pyramids. These massive stone structures were built as tombs for the pharaohs, designed to last for eternity. The Great Pyramid of Giza, constructed during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu around 2500 BCE, is one of the most incredible feats of engineering in human history. Standing at over 480 feet tall, it was the tallest man-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. While Egypt was building pyramids, a different kind of ruler was emerging in China. Around 2070 BCE, a legendary figure named Yu the Great founded the Xia dynasty, China's first dynasty. Yu became a hero in Chinese mythology for his efforts to control the devastating floods of the Yellow River. His ability to tame nature earned him the respect and loyalty of his people, and the Xia dynasty laid the foundation for what would become one of the longest continuous civilizations in the world. In the ancient city of Babylon, another ruler was making his mark on history. Around 1750 BCE, King Hammurabi created one of the earliest and most famous legal codes, the Code of Hammurabi. This set of laws covered everything from property disputes to criminal punishments. It was groundbreaking for its time, emphasizing the principle of justice and responsibility. Hammurabi's code is best remembered for its philosophy of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, though in practice, it was far more nuanced than that. Further to the west, the Hittites were rising in what is now Turkey. Led by powerful rulers like Labarnas, they built an empire that rivaled Egypt and Babylon. The Hittites were among the first to master the art of ironworking, giving them an edge in warfare. At the same time, in the Aegean, the Mycenaeans were laying the groundwork for Greek civilization. Known for their impressive palaces, warrior culture, and involvement in the legendary Trojan War, the Mycenaeans were the predecessors of the classical Greeks who would later change the world. As these empires were rising and falling, new ideas were taking root in China. Around the 6th century BCE, two great thinkers, Confucius and Laozi, were shaping the way people viewed the world. Confucius believed that society functioned best when everyone understood their role and acted with respect and integrity. His teachings emphasized duty, family loyalty, and the importance of education. Meanwhile, Laozi, the founder of Taoism, took a more mystical approach. He encouraged people to live in harmony with nature, to go with the flow of life rather than resist it. These two philosophies, Confucianism and Taoism, would profoundly influence Chinese culture and society for centuries to come. Back in the Mediterranean, the Greeks were expanding their influence. City-states like Athens, Sparta, and Corinth sent out colonies to the far reaches of the Mediterranean, from the shores of modern-day Turkey to southern Italy. But it was in Italy, in 753 BCE, that one of the most famous cities in history was founded, Rome. Legend has it that the twin brothers Romulus and Remus, abandoned as infants and raised by a she-wolf, fought over who would rule their new city. Romulus killed Remus and named the city after himself, Rome. Little did anyone know at the time, but Rome would grow from a small settlement into one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. By the time Rome was founded, the Mediterranean world was teeming with different civilizations, each leaving its mark. The Greeks had already established their city-states, and Egyptian and Mesopotamian cultures were ancient by comparison. But Rome would not be just another city. It would grow into a colossus, a beacon of engineering, governance, and military power. But as Rome began to build its identity, across the sea in Persia, a ruler named Cyrus the Great was busy shaping an empire that would challenge the powers of the world. Cyrus wasn't just a conqueror, he was a visionary. After overthrowing the Medes Empire in the 6th century BCE, Cyrus created the Achaemenid Empire, uniting a massive territory that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Indus River. His empire would serve as a model for how to govern diverse peoples, with policies of tolerance and respect for local customs and religions. Cyrus's greatest triumph came in 539 BCE when he conquered Babylon, a city that had long been a jewel of the ancient world. But instead of plundering the city, Cyrus freed the Jewish captives living in exile and allowed them to return to their homeland, a decision that would earn him a unique place in Jewish history. His legacy as a just ruler would resonate for centuries, and the empire he built was expanded by successors like Darius the Great and Xerxes the First, who brought the empire into conflict with another rising power, Greece. While Persia was expanding eastward, Greece was a collection of independent city-states, each with its own system of government, culture, and way of life. Athens became known as the birthplace of democracy, where citizens could vote on important matters, an idea that would influence the future of governance worldwide. But this democracy had limits. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded from the process. On the other hand, Sparta was a city-state obsessed with military strength. From a young age, Spartan boys were trained to be soldiers, growing up in a harsh, disciplined environment where physical strength and loyalty to the state were everything. These two city-states, Athens and Sparta, couldn't have been more different, yet they both played pivotal roles in the defense of Greece, against a massive Persian invasion. In 490 BCE, The Persian Emperor Darius sent a massive army to invade Greece, but the Greeks, against all odds, managed to fend off the invaders at the Battle of Marathon. 10 years later, Darius's son, Xerxes, launched an even larger invasion. The most famous stand of this campaign occurred at Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans, led by King Leonidas, made a heroic last stand against the Persian army. Although the Spartans were defeated, their sacrifice inspired the rest of Greece to unite. The turning point came at the Battle of Salamis, where the Athenian navy, led by Themistocles, ambushed the Persian fleet in a narrow strait. This victory shifted the momentum, and soon the Persians were forced to retreat. Greece had won its freedom, and in the aftermath, Athens entered a golden age of culture, art, and philosophy. With the Persian threat gone, Athens flourished. The city became a hub of culture and knowledge, where thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle walked the streets, engaging in deep philosophical discussions that would shape Western thought for millennia. Pericles, the Athenian statesman, oversaw the construction of the Parthenon, a symbol of Athenian democracy and power. But golden ages never last forever. As Athens grew more powerful, tensions with Sparta reached a boiling point. What followed was the Peloponnesian War, a brutal conflict that lasted nearly 30 years. In the end, Sparta emerged victorious, but both city-states were left weakened and vulnerable. Greece's glory days were over, and soon, a new power to the north was watching and waiting for its moment. That power was Macedon, a kingdom that had long been overshadowed by its more famous neighbors. But under King Philip II, Macedon reformed its military, and soon, Philip's son, Alexander, would take the throne. Tutored by Aristotle himself, Alexander was a brilliant military strategist. At just 20 years old, he set out to conquer the known world, and conquer he did. In just over a decade, Alexander the Great built one of the largest empires in history. He defeated the mighty Persian Empire, marched through Egypt, and ventured as far as India. Along the way, he founded cities that would bear his name, like Alexandria in Egypt, which would become a center of learning and culture. But Alexander's conquests weren't just about military dominance. They spread Greek culture far and wide, creating a period known as Hellenism, where Greek art, science, and philosophy mingled with the cultures of the East. Yet, Alexander's empire was as short-lived as his life. He died at the young age of 32, and with no clear successor, his empire fractured into smaller kingdoms, each ruled by one of his generals. These kingdoms, the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in the East, and the Antigonids in Greece, would dominate the region for centuries. But while these kingdoms squabbled for power, another city was rising in the West, one that would come to overshadow them all: Rome. Rome began as a small city-state on the Italian peninsula, but its ambitions were anything but small. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome had built a powerful republic, and it had its sights set on controlling the entire Mediterranean. Standing in its way was Carthage, a wealthy city-state in North Africa. The Punic Wars were a series of bitter conflicts between Rome and Carthage, with both sides determined to dominate the Mediterranean. The most famous of these wars saw Hannibal, the Carthaginian general, leading his army, including war elephants, across the Alps to surprise the Romans. For years, Hannibal terrorized the Italian countryside, but despite his victories, Carthage eventually lost the war. Rome emerged as the undisputed power in the Western Mediterranean, and from there, it continued to expand its empire, conquering Greece, North Africa, and parts of Asia Minor. But as Rome expanded, cracks began to form within the republic itself. Political corruption, economic inequality, and civil wars threatened to tear the republic apart. In this climate of unrest, one man rose above the chaos: Julius Caesar. A brilliant military leader, Caesar's conquests in Gaul made him a hero to the Roman people, but his ambition made him a threat to the Senate. In 49 BCE, Caesar famously crossed the Rubicon River, declaring war on the Roman Senate. After a swift and decisive civil war, Caesar emerged victorious and declared himself dictator for life. But his rule didn't last long. In 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators, including his friend Brutus, who believed they were saving the Republic. Instead, they plunged Rome into further chaos. After Caesar's death, a power struggle ensued. On one side was Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general, and on the other was Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian. Their rivalry culminated in the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian defeated Antony and his ally, Cleopatra of Egypt. With Antony and Cleopatra's defeat, Octavian became the undisputed ruler of Rome, taking the name Augustus and ushering in a new era, the Roman Empire. Under Augustus, Rome entered a period of peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For over 200 years, the Roman Empire flourished, expanding its borders to Britain, North Africa, and the Middle East. The Roman army was unmatched in its discipline and organization, while Roman engineers built roads, aqueducts, and monumental buildings like the Colosseum. But despite its power, Rome faced challenges from within and without. Christianity, a new religion born in the Roman province of Judea, began to spread. At first, Christians were persecuted, seen as a threat to the Roman way of life. But by the 4th century CE, Emperor Constantine embraced Christianity, and it soon became the empire's dominant religion. Constantine's reign marked a turning point in Roman history. He not only legalized Christianity with the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, but he also moved the empire's capital from Rome to the newly built city of Constantinople. This shift in power signaled the beginning of the end for the Western Roman Empire. As Rome's power waned, pressure from external forces grew. In the 5th century CE, waves of barbarian invasions, Visigoths, Vandals, Huns, swept through the empire. In 410 CE, the Visigoths, led by Alaric, famously sacked the city of Rome. By 476 CE, the last Roman emperor in the West was overthrown, marking the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But Rome's legacy didn't die with the fall of its empire. The Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople, continued for another 1,000 years, preserving much of Roman law, culture, and tradition. And in the West, the idea of Rome lived on in the hearts of new rulers, like Charlemagne, who sought to revive the glory of the Roman Empire in medieval Europe. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire thrived under rulers like Justinian I, who sought to restore the Roman Empire to its former glory. Justinian's ambitious campaigns to reclaim lost Roman territories were only part of his legacy. He also codified Roman law, creating the Corpus Juris Civilis, which became the foundation for legal systems throughout Europe. But as the Byzantines were reaching new heights, a new religion was rising in the Arabian Peninsula. In the 7th century, Islam emerged under the Prophet Muhammad, uniting the tribes of Arabia and setting the stage for one of the greatest expansions in history. Within a century, the Islamic caliphates had conquered vast territories, stretching from Spain to India, spreading not just their religion, but also knowledge, art, and culture. The Islamic Golden Age saw remarkable advancements in science, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. Scholars in cities like Baghdad and Cordoba translated ancient Greek texts and built upon them, preserving the knowledge of civilizations past while making groundbreaking discoveries of their own. This era of intellectual and cultural flourishing would have a lasting impact on the world. While the Islamic world thrived, Europe was entering a period of fragmentation. The fall of Rome left a power vacuum, and in its place, new kingdoms arose, each seeking to build their own version of power and authority. The Franks, under Clovis I, consolidated their rule in what is now France, and by the 8th century, under Charlemagne, they would form the foundation of what would become known as the Holy Roman Empire. Charlemagne's rule was marked by a renewal of learning and culture, often referred to as the Carolingian Renaissance. His empire stretched across much of Western Europe, and in the year 800 CE, he was crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope, symbolizing the unity of church and state. But even Charlemagne's vast empire could not last forever. After his death, the empire fragmented, and Europe entered an era of feudalism. Feudalism became the dominant system in Europe for centuries. Power was decentralized, with kings and emperors relying on the loyalty of local lords, who in turn controlled vast estates and armies of knights. Life, for the majority of people, the peasants, was harsh. They worked the land in exchange for protection from their lords, living in a rigid hierarchy that allowed little room for social mobility. But even as Europe seemed locked in a medieval world of castles and knights, monumental events were occurring elsewhere that would shape the course of history for centuries to come. In the early 13th century, far to the east, a new power was on the rise. Genghis Khan, born Temujin, united the nomadic tribes of Mongolia under his leadership and embarked on a campaign of conquest that would create the largest contiguous empire in history. The Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, and under Genghis Khan's rule, trade routes like the Silk Road flourished, bringing goods, ideas, and cultures from east to west. Genghis Khan's empire didn't die with him. His grandsons continued his conquests, most notably Kublai Khan, who established the Yuan dynasty in China. The Mongols ruled over a diverse array of peoples and cultures, fostering trade and communication across their vast empire. But even the Mongols couldn't escape the cycles of history. Over time, their empire fragmented, and by the late 14th century, it had largely dissolved. While the Mongols were building their empire in the east, important changes were happening in Europe as well. In 1215, King John of England was forced by his nobles to sign the Magna Carta, a document that limited the power of the king and established key legal principles, including the right to a fair trial. Though its immediate impact was limited, the Magna Carta laid the groundwork for modern constitutional governments and the protection of individual rights. And then, Europe began to awaken from the medieval slumber. The Renaissance, beginning in the 14th century, was a rebirth of classical learning, art, and science. Cities like Florence, Venice, and Rome became centers of creativity, as artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo produced some of the most iconic works of art in human history. At the same time, thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli and Erasmus questioned the nature of power, politics, and morality, laying the foundations for modern thought. But perhaps the most important change during the Renaissance wasn't in art or philosophy, it was in the way people saw the world. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, sailing under the Spanish flag, set out to find a new route to Asia. Instead, he stumbled upon the Americas, a continent previously unknown to Europeans. This discovery set off an era of exploration and colonization that would reshape the world. European powers, Spain, Portugal, England, and France, rushed to claim territories in the New World, and with them came explorers, conquerors, and settlers. But the arrival of Europeans also brought devastating consequences for the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Disease, warfare, and exploitation led to the collapse of powerful civilizations like the Aztecs and Incas, forever altering the social and political landscape of the Western Hemisphere. As European powers expanded overseas, another monumental event was happening within Europe itself. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses on the door of a church in Wittenberg, challenging the practices of the Catholic Church. This act sparked the Protestant Reformation, which fractured the religious unity of Europe and led to centuries of conflict between Catholic and Protestant states. The Reformation changed not only religious life, but political life as well. England, under King Henry VIII, broke away from the Catholic Church entirely, creating the Church of England and plunging the country into religious turmoil for generations. While Europe was embroiled in religious conflict, the Ottoman Empire was rising to new heights under Suleiman the Magnificent. Suleiman expanded the empire's borders, bringing much of southeastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa under Ottoman control. Under his rule, the Ottomans became one of the most powerful empires in the world, dominating trade routes and influencing global politics for centuries. By the 16th century, the age of exploration was in full swing. Spanish conquistadors like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro conquered the Aztec and Inca empires, bringing vast wealth and new territories under European control. The Portuguese established trading posts along the coasts of Africa and Asia, while the Dutch and English expanded their influence through maritime exploration and the establishment of colonies. These European empires laid the groundwork for the modern global economy, but they also brought untold suffering to the indigenous peoples of the lands they colonized. The Atlantic slave trade, in particular, became a cornerstone of the colonial economy, forcibly transporting millions of Africans to the Americas in one of the darkest chapters of human history. Amid this era of conquest and colonization, Europe experienced a scientific revolution. Thinkers like Galileo Galilei, Isaac Newton, and Johannes Kepler challenged the old ways of thinking about the world and the universe. Their discoveries, from the laws of motion to the heliocentric theory, paved the way for modern science and technology. These intellectual advancements fed into the Enlightenment, a period in the 17th and 18th centuries where philosophers like John Locke, Voltaire, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau began to question the nature of government, rights, and human potential. The ideas of liberty, equality, and democracy that emerged from the Enlightenment would ignite revolutions around the world. In 1776, these ideas came to life in the American Revolution, when 13 colonies declared their independence from the British Empire. The Declaration of Independence, signed on July 4th, was a bold statement of human rights and self-governance, and after a long war, the United States of America was born. The success of the American Revolution would inspire others around the world to seek freedom and independence. Just a few years later, in 1789, France erupted in revolution. Inspired by Enlightenment ideas and fed up with the inequalities of the Ancien Regime, the French people overthrew their monarchy in a dramatic and bloody revolution. The Reign of Terror, led by Maximilien Robespierre, saw thousands of people executed by guillotine. But the revolution also gave birth to a new era of democratic ideals. Out of the chaos of revolution rose a brilliant military leader, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon's ambition led him to conquer much of Europe, but his reign was short-lived. After a series of disastrous military campaigns, he was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, and Europe began to rebuild from the ashes of war. While Europe was rebuilding across the Atlantic, Latin America was fighting for its own independence. Leaders like Simón Bolívar, known as El Libertador, led successful campaigns to free countries like Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia from Spanish colonial rule. Bolívar dreamed of a united Latin America, but the newly independent nations soon went their separate ways. As the 19th century progressed, the Industrial Revolution transformed economies and societies, bringing wealth to some and misery to others. In response to these stark inequalities of industrial capitalism, a new ideology emerged: communism. In 1848, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published the Communist Manifesto, calling for the overthrow of the capitalist system and the establishment of a classless society. Their ideas would resonate through the following centuries, inspiring revolutions and political movements across the world. While industrialization reshaped Europe, the late 19th century saw a rush by European powers to colonize Africa in what became known as the Scramble for Africa. By the early 20th century, nearly the entire continent had been divided among European empires, with little regard for the people who lived there. The artificial borders drawn by colonial powers would later contribute to decades of conflict and instability. At the dawn of the 20th century, Europe was a powder keg of nationalism, militarism, and imperial rivalries. In 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria set off a chain reaction that led to World War I, a devastating conflict that lasted 4 years and claimed millions of lives. The war brought an end to empires like the Ottoman Empire and led to a redrawing of the world's political map. But the peace that followed was short-lived. In 1939, Adolf Hitler, the dictator of Nazi Germany, invaded Poland, sparking World War II. The war would become the deadliest conflict in human history, with millions of lives lost in battles, bombings, and the horrific genocide known as the Holocaust. The war ended in 1945 with the defeat of Nazi Germany and the Axis powers, but not before 2 atomic bombs were dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, bringing the world into a new and dangerous era of nuclear weapons. After the war, the world found itself divided between 2 superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, locked in a Cold War that lasted for decades. This conflict wasn't fought with armies, but with espionage, political influence, and an arms race that included the race to space. In 1969, the world watched in awe as American astronaut Neil Armstrong became the first human to set foot on the moon, a moment that symbolized humanity's boundless curiosity and potential. From floating atoms to empires, from war to peace, the history of human civilization is one of incredible triumphs and devastating failures. We've built great cities, created awe-inspiring works of art, and unlocked the secrets of the universe. Yet, through it all, We've also faced conflict, destruction, and the harsh realities of human nature. Our journey is far from over, and as we move further into the 21st century, one thing remains constant: the human spirit's endless quest for knowledge, understanding, and a better future. History is full of conflict, intrigue, and unexpected alliances, and if the story of human civilization sparked your curiosity about the twists and turns of the past, I've got the perfect recommendation for you. The History of Britain in 10 Enemies by Paul C. Preston takes you on a fascinating journey through the eyes of Britain's greatest adversaries. From the Vikings to Napoleon and even Hitler, each chapter reveals how these enemies shaped Britain's history, for better or worse. Preston doesn't just retell battles or dates, he dives deep into the motivations, strategies, and consequences that redefined not just Britain, but the world. It's engaging, insightful, and honestly, a must-read for any history enthusiast. You can grab your copy right now on Amazon. The link is in the description below, trust me. This is one historical adventure you don't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.